One of the most profound healing lessons that I learned came from a highly, highly toxic person. There's still things we can learn by the toxic people that we've come across in our lives if we step aside and ask ourselves the question, what was the universe trying to teach me here versus what was God trying to do with me? Why am I getting punished? Why did the universe put another person like this in my life? And so on. And this person used to say to me all the time when I would express being upset, hurt feelings, and expressed it in a healthy way, as I've been taught by 5,000 years of therapy. And they would say it as a way to probably gaslight me, but there's still a great truth to it. It was like high level gaslighting. It's like when someone is lying, a really good liar, if you've ever been around a liar, their lies actually have a heavy dose of truth in them. It's like the people who buy followers and buy engagement on their social media accounts. The ones who are really good at it, they already have a good amount of engagement, a good amount of followers, and then they buy like 30% more, and then it looks real. That was this person. So I'm going to say they, just so that I'm don't do anything to risk giving this person away. Okay. So when I would express any of these things, they would say to me, it's not personal. Stop making everything so personal, Tiffany, over and over and over again. And truly, it's not personal when someone is doing something, saying something, ghosting you, stonewalling you. I mean, even quite frankly, someone doing, next level physical abuse, which I've experienced a lot of in childhood. Is it personal? Does it feel personal? Is it happening to you? And we don't want to take away from that experience and that trauma, of course, but it is not about us. When someone is doing stuff like that, it's about them. And what has helped me more than anything really detach from believing it's me, I'm bad, I'm the problem, it's me. It's always a good thing to recognize your part in something. That's what makes you a healthy and safe person. But if you grew up how I did, I tend to over blame myself. I tend to take the pain, the blame right away. Like, I'm a bad girl. It's me. I'm so sorry. That whole thing was that's my entire default setting. I do a lot of work and a lot of management and a lot of healing to not do that anymore. And toxic people, by the way, love people like that because then it's very easy for them to turn it all around back on you. You're too sensitive, you're too dramatic. Oh, you're so busy all the time, you're focused on work. Well, you get upset so easily. Oh, well, you tend to think everything is personal. So what has helped me really detach and truly understand that it isn't personal is when I learned the attachment theory and the different attachment styles that people have based on the product of how they grew up, what they witnessed, what they absorbed, the behaviors that were happening around them in childhood, and then the dynamics between those styles. And I am so thrilled to have on the guest that I brought on today. I brought on what I would say is one of the world's leading experts on attachment theory, Thais Gibson. She's very well known on YouTube. You've probably seen her videos. And she is going to really break this down and the dynamics and why people do the things that they do and why we respond the way that we do and how our response can also affect what they do and vice versa. It's really fascinating. And this is going to help any relationship in your life, from friendships to love relationships to people who work for you on your team, to coworkers. It's really been a game changer. And I truly wish that everyone came with a label where we could know their birth sign, we could know their human design, and we could know their attachment style, and of course, a list of all their childhood wounding. Wouldn't that be helpful? And perhaps also their credit score. Breaking news, registration is officially open for my once a year, 2-day in-person mastermind experience here in Manhattan Beach, California. This is specifically designed for you if you are looking to have exponential growth in your business, but you know there's things that you're doing and not doing that are preventing that from happening, both in terms of your mindset, but also in actual practical strategies, you will walk away with having the clear income generating skills that you need in order to move the needle substantially in your business. This is not some information motivational fest. We are actually implementing and customizing on the spot. So I have my money move sale. The first 11 people who sign up get $1,000 off. Now, 5 spots have already been taken. They claimed them earlier. They are from my private clients. I have no idea if these 11 spots are already gone at the time of this recording, but you'll be able to know when you go to the page. There is a total of 30 tickets, and that's it. Once a year, you'd have to wait an entire year to learn from me at this level. I'm bringing in world-renowned healers who are my personal healers and my entire ProjectME creative team for you to learn from during this incredible experience. Go to projectmewithtiffany.com/mastermind event. You can swipe up. The link is in the show notes. It's also in the description here on YouTube. What up, my people, my posse, my fellow crazies? It's your host, Tiffany Carter, and this is the show that is going to help you grow your business, your bank account, that big, beautiful brain of yours, your mindset, your abundance, your relationships, and everything in between. Well, I've brought on a treat for you today for all of you psychological nerds that literally go into the weeds on every form of typing yourself. And we love this attachment theory. And if you're new to the attachment theory, we're going to brush on that. But my guess is most of you are familiar with it. I have on Thais Gibson. She is very well known on all the things for discussing attachment theory and, most importantly, showing you in a simple, straightforward way how to apply this to your life to improve the relationship with yourself, with others, to understand the dynamic. I mean, tell me if you agree with me on this. I feel like whether it is Enneagram, whether it's like a Myers-Briggs, whether it's attachment style, whether it's introvert, extrovert, whether it's codependent addict, these labels, and we all like a label and we all hate a label. But what I notice people do, and I've done it myself, is we can actually have an unhealthy attachment to a label and then kind of start using that as, well, I'm an introvert. Well, I'm an empath. Well, I'm an avoidant. Right. And then it's like that becomes just, well, this is just how I am. And what I'm gathering from looking at like your personal development school that you have, and we'll link everything, you guys, in the show notes because she has a really cool free trial that you guys can do, is that you make sure that's not yet another label someone's putting on themselves. There's actually like a strength to it.
100%. So first of all, thank you for having me. Excited to be here with you. And I think that you gave such a fantastic and really powerful intro, but you're exactly right. So we look at attachment theory not as this like diagnosis clinically. It's really the subconscious set of rules that you've learned about how to give and receive love and behave in relationships. And so I look at these things as an entry point into understanding some of your patterns, what core fears you'll bring into relationships, what your needs will be, what kind of patterns you'll have around boundaries, ability to emotionally regulate, and really how you'll communicate. And those 5 key pillars, when we know somebody's attachment style, we can actually recondition these things if they're maladaptive. So for example, if somebody grows up, nobody is born with an attachment style. It's conditioned into them through repetition and emotion over time. And so if we see some things that we don't like or that are not working for us, it's not something we're stuck with. And we actually run these 90-day programs to become secure because it really doesn't take that long and it's not that hard. It's just that most people are treating these things at the conscious level of mind. And we actually have to do reconditioning work at the subconscious level. So, just a couple really quick things that people should know is that, first of all, your conscious mind, the part that you think of as your logical thinking, rational self that feels like it's making decisions all day, that is not running the show. Your subconscious mind is running the show. And it's actually responsible for 95 to 97% of all of our beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and actions. And our conscious mind is 3 to 5%. The second thing is that your conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower your subconscious mind.
Ooh, that's important for my fellow control freaks, Virgos, more labels, right? Because I mean,
Absolutely.
honestly, okay, like if you've done like a lot of therapy, you've done a lot of healing work, mindset work, I'm gonna be straight up with you. I can get caught up in self-will and thinking that 3 to 5%, oh, I can manage it with that 3 to 5%, which is delusional.
Totally. Yeah. And it's so difficult. That's when we feel like we've got like the gas and the brakes on at the same time in our life. Like if we have ever had the experience, and you see this show up in everybody's lives all the time, it's your New Year's resolution and you're like, I'm going to quit eating chocolate. And then you go like 4 days and you're back to eating chocolate. Or you're like, I'm going to stop this bad habit I have of drinking too much after work or going to the fridge and binge eating food or all these things that are across society. The reason that we have these problems and we fall back into the same old pitfalls, even though our conscious mind is like, no, I'm done with this. I want better. I want to stop getting angry in relationships. I want to stop pushing people away or clinging on too tightly. Like the reason all of these things keep coming back is because they're pre-existing programs. And if we're not actually doing the work to understand how our subconscious works and how to reprogram what was maladaptive, then it can actually feel a lot like we're in these push-pull patterns everywhere we go.
Would it be like saying you have your pre-existing diabetic, right? Like you have the markers, and to think that you can consciously just will it away without doing anything would be strange, right? It's like that's just not going to happen. It's like
Exactly.
this stuff is so rooted that to be that hard on yourself, to think that self-will alone is going to get you to stop attracting the toxic people and being attracted to them. That's insane. Of course, I'm going to keep using myself as an example. I'm a really good example for you. I'm a great case study. So let's go through briefly the 5 key pillars, because I think there's people who are listening that probably also have been typed wrong, or maybe at one point in their life, and correct me if I'm wrong if this isn't a thing, because I feel at one point in my life, I was an anxious attachment. Then I feel like I was disorganized attachment style. And now I kind of think I'm an avoidant, which I'm horrified by.
Okay, so I would love to go through like we'll talk about the 4 major attachment styles. We can get the 5 key pillars are like how to recondition, but should we go through and
Okay. Because I
do
was
the
thinking when you said 5, I was like, oh my God, is there an attachment style I'm not aware of? I go, maybe I'm that too.
we'll do the 4. I have an inkling as to why you think that. And we can even talk about that for a second because it's something that I actually fell into. And I'm sure that many people fall into this who are the attachment style that I think you probably are, but we'll come to that. So basically at a very high level, there's 4 attachment styles. First one is secure. Securely attached individuals throughout their childhood and early formative years behaviorally get a lot of what we call approach-oriented behaviors in psychology. All that really means in non-clinical terms is just that when you cry as a child, when you're upset, when you're dysregulated, your caregivers go towards you, try to figure out what's wrong and try to soothe you. That sounds like a small thing, but when you get a repetitive emotional pattern of that growing up, you constantly have that as your baseline. It has a profound implication. You learn my emotions are safe to express. My needs are worthy of being met and attuned to. It's safe to trust people. It's safe to rely on other people. And I'm loved for who I am, even in my hard moments. As adults, that means that you've got really healthy modeling for relationships. Your early childhood programming and behavioral development says, hey, like we've got all these good things going for us. Relationships are safe and we can trust them and they make sense.
So you're
And so,
telling me there are people who literally, this is like shocking to me, that out because in their childhoods and they really have secure attachment. They don't need to like go through your schooling. Like they
yes,
literally are secure by way of their environment and how they were parented.
yes. And it's
Do you
actually
have a
substantial.
percentage? Is this like a lot of
Yes.
people?
So the original research on this, like the largest sort of study ever done on this, was about 30 years ago, and it actually said 50%.
I don't know any of these people. That says a lot about me.
I would make an argument that a lot of that was self-reporting. And I actually find that a lot of dismissive avoidant self-report is secure because they think that because they're not feeling emotions or on the roller coaster. Like if you're anxious and you're feeling needy and clingy and triggered, you know you're anxiously attached when somebody tells you. If you're disorganized, you know relationships have always been a roller coaster and it's really hard. Dismissive avoidants are like, yeah, I'm pretty easygoing. I'm pretty, non-emotional. So I think they self-report, and I do believe that skews the results. Research more recently, although there's nothing that's been done that's like really large enough that again isn't also self-reporting, but it looks like the number is somewhere closer to 25 or 30%. So it's on the decline. So securely attached individuals, they actually report having not just longer lasting relationships. I don't find that to be a key marker of success. The second stat that they do report is that they actually feel fulfilled, happy, and thriving in their relationships. And to me, that's a key marker of success. It's not just that they last long, it's that they last long and I love and care about my relationship.
I
So
love that
that's
you
your
said
secure.
that because I can self judge about like long-term relationships because you hear people going, these are my friends since high school and I've been with this person for this long, and I can kind of low-key judge myself because I don't have a bunch of those because most of those people were very toxic and unhealthy as a byproduct of how I grew up and what felt familiar to me, etc. And some of my most beautiful relationships are maybe just a few years old.
Yeah. And that's actually a great thing from your perspective, right? Like that's a great thing that you've come out of that and you've built those thriving relationships. It's a huge sign of healing, right? Because our subconscious mind, and we'll talk about this later, but it actually really works hard to maintain its comfort zone. So when we have this growing up, this upbringing of a lot of toxic patterns, if we have a parent or somebody who's really unhealthy, then that's what we know. That's what love is to us. And that's what we'll try to replicate. So those are the people we'll invest in. Your
Mm.
conscious mind says, this is unhealthy. I can see the red flags. Your subconscious mind says, it's familiar. And so it's comfortable. So I am safe. I'm going to keep choosing this. And so, to your point earlier, when you said people seem to choose those same toxic people, that's not their fault. That's a history of trauma or, big T trauma, small T trauma, whatever it is. And that your subconscious is just trying to protect you by choosing the same things. And it's
So
also taking
securely
the
attached people, they find what's familiar to them are, would you say, other securely attached people?
exactly, which is also why they have greater relationship success.
Wow.
Anxious.
These sound like aliens to me.
When we get to the anxious, I'll go through the other ones and I'll tell you something else that relates back to that in just a moment.
Interrupting this incredible interview to make sure you do not miss the event of the year. This is my 2-day in-person mastermind experience where you are going to set yourself up to generating lifestyle changing abundance. You're going to change your money story, create life-changing legacy cash while helping countless people with your gifts at this event. You are walking away with income generating skills that are going to pay off for you for decades to come. So it's my proven growth strategies and my proprietary money mindset healing techniques where you're going to be able to do this oceanside in an $80 million beach house, hearing the waves crash, the sand beneath your toes in a fun, abundant environment. Because the more fun you have, the more money you make, and you get to learn these things without being in a sterile environment or sitting in some hotel. I want it to be expansive. I want you to be in your creative zone of genius. This is how we make big things happen in a short amount of time. It's time for you to design your business and structure your offers so you can make more and work less. So all of the details are meticulously laid out in the information page. I wrote every single word and I did my best to answer every question in the frequently asked questions for you. And you'll see tons and tons of reviews that are undeniable of what you can expect to have happen at this event and after the event. Go to projectmewithtiffany.com/mastermind event. You can swipe up. The link is in the show notes and it's in the description on YouTube. And it is in my link in bio on Instagram and on TikTok at Project Me with Tiffany. First 11 spots are getting my money move sale and it's $1,000 off. There's also a VIP upgrade available that is mind blowing. And there are only 5 spots for that special VIP upgrade. Don't sleep on this. Last year, it sold out in 6 days. All right. So you need to run, even if you're pausing the episode, to go in here and grab your ticket to the tax deductible business game changing event that will impact every area of your life and bring in massive abundance.
So the other 3 insecure styles are, number 1, the anxious. The anxious attachment style or anxious preoccupied, they grow up and they usually actually have very loving parents, but there's a lot of inconsistency around their dynamics. So an example could be very loving parents, and then one parent is traveling all the time or sort of more avoidant than the other person or parent. A much more common example is just that somebody has very loving parents, but they both work all the time. So because the subconscious gets programmed or conditioned through repetition plus emotion, this child grows up in a household and feels like love is there and it's good, but it's constantly taken away. Love is there, love is taken away. Love is there, love is taken away. So they grow up to have these big core fears around, I will be abandoned, I'll be alone. What if I'm not good enough? And that's why love is leaving me. What if I'm disliked or rejected or excluded? Like those are their big core fears and sensitivities that actually tend to really sabotage their relationships. And they cope with these things by holding on as tight as they can, which of course, unfortunately, ends up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy for most people because they may come on too strong or move too quickly. And then the other person panics and feels like they want to run away. Interestingly enough, that point that I was going to come back to a second ago is that we also choose that subconscious comfort zone. Just like you said, secure people choose that. Well, what are anxious attachments doing? They are dismissing and avoiding themselves all the time because they are so busy people pleasing and focusing externally. And the biggest comfort zone that we choose from is the relationship we have to self. And so who do anxiously attached individuals tend to choose? They invest in dismissive and avoiding people, often the dismissible avoidant attachment style, or even fearful avoidant disorganized.
Which just totally, speaking from my own experience and just stuff I've seen with my clients, just perpetuates the cycle because you have someone who's now, right, pulls back and then that ignites the anxious and now you've got a whole shit show going on.
Exactly. And it's funny because the conscious mind is like, oh, I know better. This isn't good. But how many times have you seen anxious people keep choosing the wrong person and hold on so tight to the wrong person because to their subconscious, it's still familiar?
Well, what I find tricky is that even in knowing and doing this work, and even in my case, and I can speak for a lot of people listening, having done a gazillion years of therapy and all the things, where I can end up attracting an avoidant and there it's like it's hidden almost. It's like a covert narcissist. It's like they're not presenting that way initially, but then really when you take a step back, you're like, oh my God, how did I not see this? And I'm saying in friendships, in love life, even in business arrangements, employees. And it's like, oh my God, how did I not see this? And it's right here.
There's a really good reason for this. So the first thing is that your attachment style won't present until you've formed an attachment most of the time, meaning that you've actually built a bond, connected, dropped the mask, you're feeling more comfortable with somebody. The second thing is that your conscious mind, the part of you that really realizes and it says, oh, I see their patterns, that part, That part of your mind takes in about 40 to 60 bits per second of data. Your subconscious and unconscious collectively take up to 1 billion bits per second of data. So you meet somebody and you're like, you are picking up this huge web of information about them at a subconscious level through their micro expressions, body language, tone of voice, posturing, all these things. And often that's where we're choosing from. So our conscious mind may not realize things. Our subconscious is like, oh, this person, they're so familiar. So I'm going to go and invest in them.
They're
And
safe.
exactly.
This is a
So there's
safe person. Oh,
there,
this is oh, I find this one, this is healthy. That's like a red flag, basically, if you're saying that.
and there's this whole like behind the curtain thing happening all the time to us. And that's why it's so important to like do the subconscious work to be secure in ourselves, securely attached to self first, because then we tend to pick those people. So basically, at the other end of the attachment continuum from anxious preoccupied is the dismissible avoidant. Now, dismissive avoidance overarching theme is childhood emotional neglect. And this basically doesn't have to be overt. It can be very covert. It can be under the radar. So sure, there can be like food's never on the table, parents are never around. That can be the very clear, obvious form. But the vast majority of the time, like 95% plus, it's actually that like kids are at school on time, food's on the table, there's structure and order in the household. But if you have an emotion, go away and come back when you're ready to have yourself together. Or don't be a crybaby. Or, oh, real, strong little boys don't cry. There's all this messaging that a child gets that's like your emotions are wrong. They're not accepted here. Take them away. And so for a child growing up in that environment, they actually come to learn, okay, this part of me, this emotional part of me, it always gets met with rejection. So this part of me must be defective or wrong. So I'm just going to like push this part of me as far away as possible to be accepted in my environment. And that's how they cope and adapt to that kind of situation. So as adults, dismissive avoidance basically have these big core fears that are like, I'm defective, and they're so sensitive to criticism, but you'll never see it because they're very stoic. I am weak if I'm vulnerable. It's like unsafe to express emotions. I am not capable of relationships or change is often a big core belief that they have about themselves. And then, of course, fear of being trapped, helpless, or powerless in the wrong relationship. So those are their big core fears. And basically, once they form an attachment to somebody, you may not see it at the beginning, but as soon as they form an attachment, they'll usually dismiss,
Um,
avoid, push away.
how many of you are shook hearing this? I'm shook about what you said, where we don't see it until there's an attachment form, because I do believe, and myself included, we can be hard on ourselves, right? Like, how did I end up in this again? How did I not see this? I'm sure you hear this all the time from your students, right? And it's like, well, you don't see it, it doesn't show up until there's an attachment. And I speak openly about him on here, but my ex-fiance, who is a wonderful human, I mean, textbook avoidant, okay? And I said the same thing. How didn't I see this until we bought a house, we were in it together, and then all of a sudden he pulled away, and which you can imagine was incredibly abandoning to me. Here I have the ring on my finger. We've bought the house, like things that feel secure and good. And then it's like, once it was secure and good and all the, it was set in place, he, he detached in every way, sexually,
Yeah.
emotionally. I mean, physically, almost like was out to lunch, like in a dissociative state.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Just out of curiosity too, how far into the relationship was that? Like a year and a half, 2 years in?
Exactly, a year and a
Yeah.
half.
It's also the power struggle stage. It'll be amplified even more. So we have different stages of relationships. So there's dating, which is like the first 0 to 4 months. If we decide to make a commitment, we move into honeymoon, which can last for like a year from there, a year and a half. Then we hit the power struggle stage. And especially if we move into with somebody during the power struggle stage, it's just like their attachment style is so amplified. There's that actual attachment bond. And then we're in the power struggle stage of relationships. And that's where you'll be like, oh my goodness. I used to have all these clients come in and they would be like, I married my wife And then she turned into a monster right after the wedding. And it was like, actually, there's these other things happening in the background where we see that side of somebody the most right at that peak part. So, anyways, interesting to
That
know.
makes that makes so much sense. And why that we're talking about avoidance, why once the relationship is more, so to speak, secured, not even bad or tumultuous or anything, why do they vacate?
Yeah, because they go into a space where they're like, if I have to access this vulnerable part of me again, because from childhood, when I was vulnerable, it was met with pain, shame, rejection, all these sorts of things. They get into a dynamic where they're like, oh my goodness, I'm feeling that degree of vulnerability to somebody again. And they've spent their entire life forming their personality since childhood to try to stay safe and adapt to their environment by literally denying that part of themselves, literally pushing that away. So when somebody makes them feel those things, it's like the antithesis, it's like their kryptonite. It's like everything that they stand against in terms of their conditioning. And so it's so difficult and painful for them to feel that vulnerable. So they'll shut down extremely hard as a means of self-protection.
What does an anxious attachment person tend to do when you're in that phase of a relationship? Once the relationship feels kind of more, it sounds like solid, right? You're far enough along in it. How does the anxious attachment person start sabotaging?
They usually become a little bit critical. So they have a hard time self-sourcing their needs. So they'll do a lot of like high level nagging. Like they'll say, oh, you never want to spend enough time with me. You don't do this, you don't do that. But unfortunately, like criticism is such a big impactor to a dismissive avoidant. They take it so personally, even though you don't see it. And they respond to criticism by just shutting down further and further and further. And so you'll see it become this, I call them our primary trigger patterns. We have these our biggest triggers, and I know we'll come back to, we still have to come back to the fearful avoidant attachment style in a second, but just to go down the rabbit hole for one moment, basically every relationship has a primary trigger pattern. So if you look at a typical anxious attachment, dismissive avoidant, the anxious attachment's biggest core wound is abandonment. And one of the biggest core wounds of the dismissive avoidant is fear of being trapped. So what do you see? You'll see that the dismissive avoidant starts pulling away a little. That triggers the abandonment core wound, exactly how each person behaves in accordance to their own core wound to try to cope with it. Re-triggers the other person's biggest core wound. So the AP starts panicking, they hold on tighter. That behavior causes the DA to feel their core wound of being trapped more. They pull away further. They pull away further, it re-triggers the I am abandoned core wound for the AP, and these will go around and around. And I actually spent a big part of my practice back in the day when I worked with clients just helping people solve their primary trigger patterns, because just that will like revolutionize your relationship when you realize like, oh, we're caught in this loop. And it also tends to be the thing that dissolves relationships most in the power struggle stage.
Do you feel that both parties need to be involved in this type of healing work to see a difference? Or do you believe one of the two people can start working on becoming securely attached to themselves and like there could be a difference in the dynamic?
It's a fantastic question. One person needs to do the actual work. So, like, get nitty gritty, get in there. The other person has to be willing to participate. So I would see clients all the time come in and they would be like, yeah, my partner's kind of against therapy and or counseling, and I'm going to come in and I want to do this work myself. And then they would communicate differently. They would ask their partner their needs. They would ask their partner to communicate differently. They would lead by example, and both people would become secure in the relationship together as a result. It's actually the experience with me and my husband as well. I met him. I was still a little fearful avoidant. He was definitely still largely dismissive avoidant. I understood the work. I started applying the stuff, and we're both very secure for the last 10 years plus. So, there's that component of things that makes a huge impact. But the thing that will never work, and I'm really against this, is if one person's pouring into the work, doing everything, and the other person refuses to do anything at all. That's a recipe for like, you're just going to be in a relationship where you're going to be burnt out. You're pouring into it. Somebody's not even responding. And then it's imbalance and it's honestly unjust.
This is exactly why I left. Is you can't keep doing that. You're
Oh,
depleting yourself. You can't do it. And I don't know if you agree with me. I do believe some people are so I don't know the exact proper term, so forgive me, but like that avoidant, where even the vulnerability of being willing to participate in this changing of dynamic ain't going to happen because that's what kept them safe their whole life.
Exactly. And this is what we would just call like a more extreme dismissive avoidance. So for example, when I met my husband, like he had already done a lot of introspection for a couple years before we met, and I was doing a lot of deep work. And so that was like it's kind of like an exception in a sense. Like he wasn't extremely dismissive avoidant. But when you see somebody who's really extreme, sometimes even looking at communicating differently, looking at opening up, looking at talking about a need or receiving feedback, sometimes those things are so triggering that like there's no window open. There's not even like a little crawl space open to get in there and help transform the relationship. And when I see people who struggle with it, I always tell them, look, if you're not sure you're going to see the needle move at all and the person may not participate, set a deadline so that you don't stay in the gray area forever. Say, I'm going to pour into this for like 3 months or 6 months or whatever it might be relative to like the degree of investment you have in the relationship. Do everything you can. Best case scenario, everything works out. The person heals with you. You both become secure. Worst case scenario, you learned all these tools that you have for your next relationship and for the rest of your life, and you got to put them into practice. That person didn't show up. And then you also get to walk away free of regret, free of guilt, and with a lot of certainty and closure.
Exactly what I did. And then I'm laughing because guess what an avoidant does when you leave?
Tries to reel the relationship back in. Yeah, it happens a lot, especially in the longer term relationships, because
Because now you're away. They don't feel trapped anymore. It's like,
100%. I call this our feelings minus fears. Avoidants tend to operate in this dynamic. So they have their feelings minus fears. If they have really strong feelings, 10 out of 10, but as they get really vulnerable, their fears are 10 out of 10, they're not showing up in the relationship. It's like a net neutral. And what happens for a lot of people is when their feelings are really strong, but their fears are really high, then you leave, there's nothing to fear. And guess what they feel now? They finally feel their feelings. And it's a very common cycle for dismissive avoidance.
it's like I'm laughing because I mean, I'm very well aware of these patterns. So what is the I guess you could say the extreme side on the anxious, like the polar opposite of this avoidant dismissive?
So the polar opposite of the anxious, and I still have to say what the fearful avoidant
Oh,
attachment
I
style is
thought,
in a
oh,
second.
wait. So there's
I
another
I
level of
skipped.
avoidant. Well, let's go there. Let's go to fearful avoidant.
Okay. So fearful avoidance is the fourth attachment style. So that's the one that's also referred to as disorganized. And it's the
Oh, okay.
same
I didn't
thing.
realize that. I thought it was just called disorganized. So that's
Yeah,
also
there's
fearful avoidant. Okay.
exactly. And this, when you started talking and you were like, oh, I was anxious and then I was dismissive and then I was like, oh, no, no, you were just disorganized the whole time, most
That
likely.
sounds about right.
This is what I was. And we can go into it, but
You can
basically the
go into
fearful.
it. It's we all know here I'm unwell. We can go into this.
No, you're amazing. And there's so many strengths for a fearful avoidant. But what you'll see is the fearful avoidant basically shares in the anxious and avoidant side. So I'll tell you why. So fearful avoidants usually grow up with the overarching theme of relationships and their upbringing being absolute chaos. The most obvious example or analogy I have for this is like a parent who's an alcoholic. And it's like one day, let's pretend it's somebody's mom. Mom comes home, she's drinking, she's in a great mood, she's really loving, and it's kind of nice. Another day, she's drank way too much, and now she's angry and cruel and quite frightening. Another day, mom's sobering up, she feels guilty, she's being really kind, she's on her best behavior. Another day, mom's going through detox. And she's in a terrible mood and she's short and shut down. And it's like you never know what you're going to get. So, fearful avoidance or disorganized basically grew up with more big T trauma than the other attachment styles. And so they actually share in the core fears of both sides of the attachment continuum because they've built really competing associations about love. On one hand, they've had good experiences, loving experiences. The other hand, they've had terrifying ones. And so they want love, but they're terrified of it. And it's this conundrum.
Like,
And so
yeah, it's like don't leave, but also don't trap me.
exactly. Exactly. And they share in the core wounds of both sides. So they have the I'll be abandoned core wound and they fear that, but they also fear being trapped or helpless or powerless. And one big overarching theme that they have is that they also fear betrayal. So they tend to be, I call fearful avoidance the lie detectors. They are like really good at like scanning their environment. If you told a story last week and the story changed by like 4%, they're going to notice. They're going to be be like, something's off,
Mhm.
something's not right. And
Absolutely. I'm like, that doesn't add up, but I might not say anything. It's a check and file.
exactly. And so, you know, what happens is fearful avoidance, they've coped with their environment by being really hypervigilant. So they notice everything, changes in micro expressions, body language, everything. They're very like they're hypervigilant about all those sorts of things. So they grow up to be push pull. You know, they tend to flip flop a lot. They're very hot and cold in their relationships. Sometimes they're in their anxious side and they're clinging. Sometimes they're in their avoidant side and they're pulling back. And because they're constantly on this roller coaster, and this is for sure what I was growing up too, is like sometimes you can be more volatile. Sometimes there can be moments of like you're not just criticizing at a high level, but I know for me, before I did a lot of work or ever went into like deep work in any capacity, I would be mean sometimes in relationships, cut deep with my word, like be harsh or critical. And in the background, it was because first I usually had all this deep hurt that I was trying to hold in. I had all these scary ideas that people were going to hurt me anyways, and that they were doing bad things in the relationship. So I have all this like programming that causes me to be very hot and cold or very push pull. Like, you know, say things that are kind of like a jab below the belt, like just not very nice. And that was something that was like so helpful and healing for me to work on in relationships because, first of all, that was how I treated myself. And so that's what we tend to also
Well,
project
tell
into
me
other
more
people.
about that. So we're the same attachment style. Well, you're
Yes.
more secure, it sounds like.
I've done like a ton of
working,
work to be
I'm
secure.
working on
But
it.
but you'll have come a long way because you've been in therapy for years. Like those
Yeah,
things
no, I've
naturally.
definitely come a long
Yeah.
way, but I mean, there's still work to be done there, especially on the romantic side.
Yeah.
I've really done a lot of work on like the friendship side or like in business because I was attracting all this stuff in all areas. It's not just like love stuff. It was all areas of you never know what you're going to get. So then I was attracting employees. You never know what you're going to get. Clients, you never know what you're going to get. Friends, you never know what you're going to get. So I've really worked on a lot of those areas. I would say the area that requires more work is on the, so to speak, love life side. So where do you feel, and whatever you're comfortable sharing, how did you end up, just so people have another example aside from my life, how you ended up in this disorganized attachment style?
Yeah, for me, like the major overarching themes were chaos in the household. So my parents definitely had a really tumultuous relationship, and there was just a lot of like roller coaster fighting all the time, all that sort of stuff. And so went through like a 20-year divorce that went to the Superior Court of Canada. Like they really had a lot of stuff going on together, and they're actually both really wonderful people and did a lot of, you know, work on themselves after that relationship. It was years ago now, but they were just like it was a trauma bond for them for sure, and they just brought out like those really difficult parts of each other. And you know, I grew up being like what's going to happen today and not knowing, and I was very parentified too. So I was always brought into the middle at a very young age, and I would go comfort my mom and then go comfort my dad. And so a lot of that, like taking on that weight and responsibility of those things from a very early time, which made me, which is also very fearful avoidant, go into relationships pouring into other people, being very generous, very loving, but having a lot of difficulty relying on people, feeling like it was safe to let people in and rely on them. So you're in this like one track recipe for burnout all the time where you're going to like pour into people, not really allow people to receive or allow yourself to receive from people, not really open up about what you actually need or feel, and then feel slighted by the imbalance in your relationship dynamics.
Did you also notice that you had friendships and even maybe clients, back when you were, doing counseling full time that mimicked your disorganized style?
So I would say that I did a lot of subconscious healing before I saw clients. So that helped a lot. So I actually had like a pretty easy time, like pretty good clients most of the time. Like there's like maybe a few exceptions to that, but very
Well,
few.
I mean, listen, there's always going to be, I always say 1 to 3% of people are certifiably crazy. I don't think we can escape that.
I generally had like a very good time with people for sure. There's two people ever that like startled me a little bit with their behaviors, but that was over like seeing like 40, 50 people a week sometimes for the better part of a decade. So that I honestly was really lucky. But like honestly too, I think because like everything's on a continuum, right? So I had like a tumultuous upbringing for sure. There's lots to be said for that, but it wasn't like super extreme. Like it wasn't like 10 out of 10. And so I never actually had too hard of a time in friendships or co-working relationships too much. Romantic relationships were the really hard thing for me. Like,
Interesting. So some people in all these thousands of students you've helped, there's a whole range. You'll have some people come
exactly.
in that say, like on the romantic relationship side, like it's very secure, but my issues like with friendships
Yes,
or vice versa. Do
exactly.
you believe that has anything to do with the like gender dynamic in the household of why, like for me, for example, because I mean there's only two of us here, so I might as well use myself. Plus, I'm a really fucking good case study. So my dad is without a doubt, he's dead, but avoidant dismissive. Sweetie married all the narcissists, right? Like my mom, narcissist. I don't know what the fuck she is, honestly. Like I have no idea what she would be in an attachment style. And I feel like because my mom was the dominant parent, also she was like a single mom for the most part. I spent most of my time with her. How much of that dynamic, like how much time you spend with a parent, what one person's type is versus the next, does that impact if you have this kind of attachment style show up more in friendships or more in love relationships?
Great question. So a lot of times what happens is it's the proximity you have will create the extreme of the style. So if you have less proximity to the more challenging person, then it won't be as extreme. In your case, from what you shared with me, like even prior to recording and jumping on here, it was like, okay, you went through extreme big T trauma consistently. So like you've got the big T, but then you've also got the repetition of it, which like that's the really tough pattern. But then it sounds like your mom was the really problematic one. And I'm assuming she was the primary caregiver.
Primary, yep.
Yeah. So you're going to just see that bleed out into everything, right? Like you're going to see extreme. So that's going to bleed out into your ability to really trust people overall in all relationship dynamics. You'll see that some people, like let's say anxious attachment styles, they have less big T trauma, but they have a lot of repetition of it. So they'll still have these wounds, but those wounds and fears won't be like as extreme or as deep, although you can have extreme cases of that situation. Things like an anxious attachment because they had a parent pass away at a young age. The things that would
Right. It
constitute
doesn't
the
have to be like your parents were these horrible people. It's stuff either
exactly.
they've innocently done, their own generational trauma, or like you said, there was a big loss, someone died, there was a big sudden job loss, like
Yeah,
money loss can all, big
exactly.
dynamic shift that caused that instability.
Exactly. And so it's really like you're looking for these big three things in regards to what will create the more intense. Like if you imagine each attachment style as being on a continuum, the greater intensity of that will be those three things. Is there big T trauma? Is there a lot of repetition of it? Or is there just repetition of small T trauma? And do you have a lot of proximity to the issue? So if there's just a parent, who isn't around a lot or is avoidant, but you don't see them that much, and your primary caregiver is super loving, super available, it will mute how extreme the attachment reaction will be. If you have proximity to somebody who's giving big T trauma all the time and you're close to them a lot, you're going to be more further along the continuum. So that's really where you're going to see. But I will say, just for anybody listening to this, like when I would see clients or even when people come into our programs now, I literally do not care how much trauma they have. Like I like if it's all three of those things and it's 10 out of 10 on all of them, irrelevant. You'll still be able to heal completely. The only thing I care about is the person willing to do the work? Are they willing to show up? do some of the reconditioning practices. Like, are they willing to actually show up and do that? Because as long as you're doing that, you can rewire anything. We have
I
neuroplasticity, all
think
those things
that's
are
so
changeable.
important you said that, because people who've gone through a lot of trauma can almost feel like I'm a lost cause. My shit's too extreme. I'm so messed up. Like, there's no hope for me. And then therefore they don't take action because they kind of feel like, what's the point? So
I
I do
know.
appreciate you saying that as someone who is a trauma survivor. I can't tell you how many times I hear literally every week, personally and professionally, from people where they're saying, why do I keep attracting toxic people? Like, I know you hear this. This has to be one of the main lines you hear. I want to stop attracting toxic guys, toxic women, toxic relationships, toxic friendships. Where, if we unpack that, where does that stem from? That
Okay, so this is
whole, I mean, it's like, there's another, oh my God, there's another person. It's like, here, I thought this person was good, and then they did me dirty. Oh, here's a friend who I thought I could trust, and then they betrayed me. Oh, here's this guy, and this guy seemed great, and he seemed all these things. He ended up being like an amazing master manipulator and liar.
Mhm. Exactly. So I love this topic. So I'm actually going to give an exercise, if that's okay, for how to
Yes, we
unpack this.
love
And I'll
exercises.
preface this exercise by saying, in all of the work I did, one to one or in our programs, I've never seen, and this is absolutely not me blaming this person because it's not their fault, but I've never seen somebody who was in a romantic relationship with a true, like, grandiose narcissist that didn't first have a subconscious comfort zone of treating themselves that way. In other words, you would see the same patterns. People who got into relationships with narcissists first, unfortunately, would speak to themselves in really cruel ways, like the narcissist does, would violate their own boundaries all the time, usually in favor of trying to please others, like the narcissist will violate your boundaries, struggle to empathize with themselves because they were always prioritizing other people's feelings, like the narcissist struggles to empathize with you. And we could go on and on and on, but those patterns correlate. So what I've actually done is I give people this exercise all the time who say this, and we basically reverse engineer that step. So I call it your relationship shadow because it's based off of Carl Jung's shadow work. And I get people, if they see the same types of patterns, relationship to relationship, be it like their series of romantic relationships, or like you were saying, like a coworker here, a friendship here, romantic partner over here, or an ex. What I get the people to do is step one, list out the traits that they see in those dynamics. So maybe it's like boundary violating, lack of empathy, rude, cruel, mean, unpredictable, whatever it might be. And then step three, I say, where do you do this to yourself?
Mm.
And as long as we're doing it to ourselves, it'll be our own subconscious comfort zone. I mean, you can see it perfectly with an anxious attachment style. They are like, why do I always attract avoidance? Well, because you dismiss and avoid your own feelings, needs, and boundaries all the time. So what we'll see there is the way out is to recondition our behaviors in the relationship to self, to then recondition our subconscious comfort zone, and then we will drop the pattern of those people.
What resistances have you found come up for people when they're going, okay, I'm willing to do the work. I hear you. I understand all of this. And now it comes time, right, to doing the reconditioning. Like, they do this exercise and it's like, oh, I do minimize my needs. I do ignore things, or kind of like stuff things that really do bother me. Right. Like, so therefore, right, then you end up attracting an
Exactly.
avoidant person who does that. What resistances come up for people when they're going to, rewire, reprogram stuff that is so fucking foreign to them?
Yeah, I think most of it's honestly just people not really knowing how it works. Like I can share a reprogramming tool because we can say reprogramming all the time, but if people are like, well, what does that actually mean? Then it doesn't help them. So the first thing is we need to, in order to change everything, we need to leverage three things: repetition, emotion, and imagery. Your conscious mind speaks language. So if I say to you, okay, whatever you do, do not think of the pink elephant. Like you probably saw an image of a pink
Right.
elephant. And it's because your conscious mind hears do not, but your subconscious doesn't speak in language. It speaks in emotions and images. Now, the conscious mind is not the one choosing to believe these, let's say, core fears or core wounds. So let's say we start with reprogramming a core fear. The conscious mind isn't saying, today I'm going to tell myself, 170 times that I'm not good enough and see how I feel. Like that's not a choice. It's an autopilot pre-existing program from the subconscious mind. So we have to speak to the subconscious and deal with the issue where it's at. It's why I'm not a big believer in affirmations, because affirmations are like my conscious mind talking to my conscious mind. And it's like, well, the problem is not at the conscious level of mind.
Yeah. If it's
So
not believable, then what's the point?
exactly, exactly. So what I get people to do is this exercise to reprogram these old beliefs. And it's one of many ways to reprogram your subconscious mind, but it's a really good starter exercise. So let's say somebody has a core belief, I'm not good enough. And we can plug in our big core beliefs or fears. Like for anxious attachments, it's like, I'm going to be abandoned, alone, excluded, disliked, rejected. We talked about these earlier if anybody wants to rewind the episode and like pluck out what theirs are. But step one is to pick the core belief and its opposite. Okay, the new idea we're trying to wire in. So just for simplicity's sake, we'll say I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. What's its opposite? I am good enough. Step two is we have to speak to our subconscious mind. So we have to speak using emotions and images. Now, interestingly enough, every single memory we have is a series of emotions and images. If I say, tell me your favorite childhood memory or your favorite memory with your, ex or your business, you would tell the memory and you would see the images. Let's say it's a childhood memory of playing on the playground. Oh, you see the images of the slide. And as people recount memories, you'll see them smile. Or if it's a sad memory, they get sad. So we can leverage that. So now we just need in step two, 10 pieces of memory to support the new idea. So I'm good enough, 10 pieces of memory or evidence that I am good enough. So this morning I got out of bed at my first alarm. I'm working on listening to a podcast every day to improve myself. I showed up yesterday really well as a friend. These types of like pieces of evidence. They don't have to be these big monumental things. They just need to be there. So now we have repetition and emotion because we have 10 of them. And we have images because we have the emotions and images in a memory. Step three, we record this somewhere, like into your phone, and you just listen back first thing in the morning because we're very suggestible in the morning. We're producing more alpha brainwaves. These things can permeate our subconscious better. And we listen back for 21 days. Research shows within 21 days of just listening back to this, as long as you're feeling the images, feeling the emotions, seeing the images, we can actually completely rewire these old ideas. Now, this is something that like can't be understated in how powerful it is. This is something I've done a ton on all of my core wounds as a prior fearful avoidant. This is something I did in client practice with people all the time and saw amazing results. And this is something that even in our self-paced programs, okay, so nobody's like watching you do the work. There's no accountability. Of our self-paced programs, over 25,000 people who came through our programs reported an 88.7% improvement on their core wounds. And again, that doesn't account for people who like took this
Right. Which is an
exit survey.
astounding number
Yeah.
because the facts are in self-paced programs, only 13% of people finish it.
Yes.
So that's a big testament to what you're talking about.
Exactly. And so, like, this is something that has a huge impact if people are just willing to show up for it. And it doesn't have to be this, like, oh my gosh, I have to focus on it so much. Like, just listen back to it, try to be present with it. It takes like 3 minutes, 5 minutes maximum in the morning. And that's it. And you're actually getting to rewire things that have probably plagued your life and relationships for decades. Now, there's other things that we have to reprogram. Reprogramming core fears is one of 5 main pillars to becoming securely attached. We have to meet our own needs, regulate our nervous system, have better boundaries and communication. But that first one, because it impacts your boundaries, because it impacts your communication, because it makes you feel dysregulated and affects your nervous system, if we get that first thing right, so many other things will be so much easier to follow.
I love this. And tell us, I know you have a free trial inside of your personal development school, and we're going to link that in the description here on YouTube and in the show notes. So what can people expect from that if they're like, you know what, I know I need to explore this further. Like this has caused enough pain in my life. Like I can't keep avoiding this work. Would you say like that's the right place for them to start?
100%. And what it does is it gets them to focus on those five key pillars, and it's all work that they can do to recondition their subconscious mind. And it's not hard. We've made it into like very simple, streamlined systems. So it takes like 10 minutes a day across 90 days generally. So that is at personal development school/free trial.
You guys need to check out her stuff on YouTube, on her various social media. I mean, you're going to learn so much even from doing that part of it. And you know what I have to say has been the most relieving and helpful thing for me that I don't think's talked about enough in the work that you do is the amount of self-compassion and grace I can give myself because I have a thorough understanding, and now I even have another layer of thorough understanding of why I ended up with these people, why I was attracted to them, why I stayed. It's not because Tiffany is an idiot, right? Like that's the self-critical. Where did I get that from? The narcissist, right? And it's like it's not because you're not doing enough healing work, you're not doing it right, you're bad. One of my go-tos is I'm a bad girl because that's what was always said to me, right? It's not that. It couldn't have turned out any other way, but now it can be shifted and you're in control of that.
100%. And I love what you said. I think that that is so true. Like having the ability to have patience with ourselves, compassion with ourselves. Like these are programs for a lot of people that we didn't ask for. Nobody volunteered and raised their hand, give me this core wound or, this experience. So we have to realize it's not our fault. It's still our responsibility, but it's not our fault. So having that grace has such a powerful impact on our healing as well.
And then you end up attracting other people who also give you grace if you're giving grace to yourself.
Exactly.
Isn't that fun? Well, thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours. This
Me
is
too.
just enough to before people's brains like get totally overstimulated and they don't take it in. So I want you guys to be able to sit with this. I want you to listen back, go binge her stuff and take more of this in if this really resonated with you, which I know it did. And I want to say I really appreciate your generosity. You don't have to give as much as you do for free, and
Oh,
it's
thank you.
rare I meet someone else in the coaching space that does that. So I want to acknowledge and celebrate you for that because it is so appreciated. And I teach abundance because you do that. You end up having that law of reciprocity. Then all the thousands and thousands of people do come in and pay. You don't need to gatekeep your stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it means a lot to me, to hear that. So thank you. But also it means a lot to me like the work, So I'm happy to share it and it always feels good to do so.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.